Welcome to the Summary of Regulations video breakdown. The videos in this section are designed to guide you through the summary of NCAA regulations. These are the forms that you need to complete in order to participate in Division III athletics. Each video will provide you with an overview of the NCAA rules and the highlights of the section of the forms. But remember, there is more detail on the forms than what we talk about here. So make sure you use both what's in front of you and these videos to help you, because you are responsible for knowing and understanding all the information in the Summary of Regulations. You might feel like you're already familiar with this information, but there are a lot of areas to go over. So whether you are a new student athlete or you've done this before, it's important to take your time and make sure you read everything before you sign. If there's something you don't understand, don't be afraid to ask questions to get clarity on what you're signing. Don't just sign off on the forms without getting the answers to questions you may have. One more thing, it's called a summary for a reason. Today you'll be going over the general regulations, but many NCAA rules have expectations and distinctions. What's okay for someone else to do may not be okay for you. That's why, when it comes to things that may impact your athletics eligibility, you should always ask before you act. The administrator in the room with you will tell you about the proper individuals on your campus who can answer questions related to NCAA bylaws and eligibility issues. At the end of this process, we hope that you will be comfortable with the forms you are signing and know where to go when you need more information. Let's get started. The first section of the Summary of Regulations deals with ethical conduct. Honesty, integrity, and sportsmanship are the core principles that support your athletics experience. Following these principles is related to your eligibility, so you should understand that if you don't act with honesty, integrity, and sportsmanship, you could violate NCAA legislation regarding ethical conduct. If you are asked by your administrators or the NCAA to provide information in connection with the rules investigation, you should always answer any questions that are posed honestly and willingly. Your athletics eligibility could be jeopardized if you don't. Sports gambling is prohibited by the NCAA. As a student athlete, you are not permitted to bet on or provide any information to anyone else who is betting on any sport that the NCAA sponsors. This means that you can't bet on a sport at any level if the NCAA has a championship in that sport, amateur or professional. In other words, no NBA, MLB, or semi-professional soccer. In addition, you can't bet on sports even if it's not the sport you play. For example, a women's soccer player will lose her eligibility if she places a bet on an NFL football game. If you'd like to know more information about this issue, once you finish completing these forms, you can click over to the section of this website called Agents, Gambling, and Amateurism. If you have additional questions about ethical conduct, talk to your athletics administrator.
This video will cover the section of the Summary of Regulations that is focused on amateurism and delayed enrollment. As we have mentioned before, the key to making sure you stay eligible is to ask before you act. As a Division III student athlete, any activities in which you participate should be run by your administrator first. Something as simple as a golf outing, a road race over the summer, or playing with a club team in your sport could impact your eligibility. After you've completed these forms, take some time to check out the section of the website called StudentAthlete Statement. In that area, we'll show you in a fun but serious way how some of these activities can affect your eligibility. Let's talk about amateurism. This is a key principle of NCAA athletics. Only amateur individuals are eligible to compete in NCAA sports. Now that you are in college, you cannot accept any money for athletic participation or skill, you can't play on a professional team, and you can't promote or endorse a commercial product or service. There are very few exceptions to these rules. If you've received money or benefits for your athletics ability, or have signed an agreement to get paid in the future, you might have an amateurism issue. Tell your administrator immediately. It's better to stay ahead of these potential issues on the front end instead of running into trouble later when you're already competing. Delayed collegiate enrollment. Most of you probably went to high school, competed in high school or club athletics, and then enrolled in college shortly after your high school graduation. But what about someone who took a year or two off before starting college? If you delayed your collegiate enrollment or you never finished high school, you may have used a season of participation if you competed before you enrolled. In certain situations, you also might fall into this category if you attended high school outside of the United States. Read this information to get more detail on the types of competition that might trigger the use of a season. You want to make sure you truly have 4 seasons of eligibility at this point. So, if you have questions, stop right here and talk to your administrator to determine whether you delayed collegiate enrollment and any effects it may have on your eligibility.
The following video discusses the section of the Summary of Regulations regarding seasons of participation. In general, each student has 4 seasons of athletics in college, per sport. For example, 4 seasons for soccer, 4 seasons for basketball, 4 seasons for baseball, and so on. The idea of using a season in Division III is different than in Division I and Division II, where a season is measured by competition only. In Division III, we measure by participation, which includes competition and practice. This means there is no redshirting in Division III. There are 2 ways that you can trigger using a season in Division III. First, you'll use a season if you compete in any game, even if you only play for the first quarter or the last inning. Even 1 second of competition will count. There are a few notable exceptions here. You haven't used your season if you compete in a scrimmage or alumni game that takes place during the preseason. You can also get a break from the rule if your team plays on 1 day of competition during the off-season, what we call the non-traditional segment. The second way to use this season is if you practice at any point after your team's first regular season game. Practicing only counts in the regular segment of your season, so you can practice during the off-season, in fall ball or spring soccer, for example, and not use the season of participation. Once you've triggered using your season, if you have a season-ending injury, you might meet the criteria to get that season back for medical reasons. This is called a medical hardship waiver. Getting a medical hardship isn't typical, but it does happen from time to time. If you have any other questions as your season progresses, make sure to talk to your administrator.
This video corresponds to the section of the Summary of Regulations about financial aid. A key principle in the philosophy of Division III is that student athletes should be integrated into the campus culture. Part of this integration includes having the same access to financial aid as the rest of the student body. For this reason, Division III does not award financial aid based on athletics leadership, ability, performance, or participation. If you are receiving financial aid from anyone other than your school or your parent or legal guardian, you must report that aid to your school. It's important for you to realize that the Division III rules apply to that financial aid as well. This means that scholarships you receive from outside organizations may not be based on athletics, and accepting one could jeopardize your eligibility. In certain, very limited situations, this might be okay, but you won't know unless you talk to your administrators first. Remember, to safeguard your eligibility, always ask before you act. This video will walk you through the next section of the Summary of Regulations, which deals with academic standards. Under the Division III rules, in order to be eligible to practice and compete, you must be enrolled full-time and be in good academic standing at your school. Good academic standing is determined by your institution, so it varies from school to school. Your athletics conference may have its own academic rules in addition to the NCAA rules. You can find out by checking with your administrator. In addition, to be eligible to compete, you must be enrolled in at least 12 credits. Make sure to keep this in mind when you are adding and dropping classes. Always add the new classes before you drop the old one, because once you drop below 12 credits, you're no longer eligible to compete. The only time it's safe to be enrolled in less than 12 credits is when you're in your last semester or quarter, and you will graduate at the end of the term. Even then, there are specific requirements that you must meet, so make sure you review your situation with your administrator first. Remember, always ask before you act. Please review the corresponding sections of your Summary of Regulations now.
This video will discuss the section of the Summary of Regulations that pertains to some additional eligibility requirements that you should know. In the NCAA, your eligibility is made up of 2 parts: your time to be able to participate and your seasons, which are your opportunities to participate. Whichever of those that runs out first is what ends your eligibility. We've already talked about your opportunities, so now let's focus on your time. In Division III, you have 10 full-time semesters or 15 quarters of time to use 4 seasons of eligibility. Each term you are enrolled full-time counts as one, and the summer doesn't count. If you take time off from school or you're only enrolled part-time, that won't count towards your time. If you are full-time at any point during that semester or quarter, even if it's only for one day, that will count as a full-time semester or quarter. That means if you start out the term enrolled full-time and then you drop down to part-time, that term is still going to count as one of your 10 semesters or 15 quarters. Next, let's talk about transferring. A good piece of information to note is that you can't transfer out of trouble, either academic or athletic problems. If you are having issues at your current school, it is possible that those troubles will follow you and you won't be able to compete right away at your new school. You may also have noticed that now you are enrolled in college. You aren't being recruited by other schools anymore. That's because other schools are not allowed to contact you about transferring unless you have been released to talk with them. There are a couple of ways an institution can get permission to talk with you. First, if you are interested in transferring to another Division III school, you can do it yourself by simply sending a self-release. This self-release gives you 30 days of privacy to talk to another institution about transferring without having to notify your current school. Complete the form, date it, and send it to the institutions where you are interested in transferring. The second way involves a situation where you are interested in transferring to a Division I or Division II school. In this instance, you can't use the self-release. You will have to see your athletics director and ask for the ability to contact other schools. He or she will be able to grant the other schools permission to talk to you about transferring. If you decide that you want to transfer, you will have to meet certain requirements to be able to play right away at your new school. These requirements are different for each division, but you can review the transfer rules that apply when you are transferring to a Division III school in the information on the forms in front of you. For example, if you are a grad student, you typically can't transfer to a Division III school and be eligible to play.
This video explains information on NCAA's drug testing policies. The NCAA has a list of banned substances. If you are tested and are found to be using one of these compounds, it may affect your eligibility. If you test positive on an NCAA drug test, you're required to sit out for a year, and you also lose at least one of your seasons. You can lose additional eligibility or even become permanently ineligible if you test positive more than once. You might also have consequences with the NCAA if you are suspended by a different sports organization. It isn't just steroids and street drugs like heroin or marijuana that are on the list, so watch out. For example, some energy drinks may make you test positive for stimulants and elevated levels of caffeine. To make sure you stay out of trouble, ask before you act. Talk to your athletic training staff before you take anything, even supplements, over-the-counter stuff, and potentially even prescriptions, just to be safe. The list of banned substances can change, so be sure to review it each academic year, and always seek help from your athletic training staff. Take a few minutes now and review this information in the Summary of Regulations.
The next area of Summary of Regulations is for new student athletes only. This video will walk you through the sections on recruitment. If you're a first-year student athlete, these sections and forms go over things that may have happened during recruiting. It is important that you read this information carefully and ask any questions that you may have because the result could have an impact on your eligibility. As you review these sections, remember the ethical conduct rules we talked about earlier. Think about any interactions you or your parent or guardian had with athletic staff when you were being recruited, any special treatment or benefits you may have been offered or received, and any situations where you took a visit to a campus. Review the corresponding sections of your Summary of Regulations now.
Once you've completed reading through the Summary of Regulations, you'll be instructed to sign the Student-Athlete Statement. Depending on how your institution has decided to go over this information with you, you might physically sign it or perhaps complete it online. Walk through the signature portions of the Student-Athlete Statement carefully so you'll understand what you are signing. You'll be given time to read the section, sign them, and return them. Before completing the signature pages, make sure to read the forms in full prior to signing. Your signature represents your knowledge and understanding of all the information in those documents. So if you have any questions, it's important to make sure that they are answered before you sign. Let's begin. In Part 1 of the Student-Athlete Statement, you're confirming that you have read the summary of regulations and are eligible to compete. Please remember to list every sport in which you are participating at the collegiate level and list your full birth date with the day, month, and year. The second section of the forms provides information about the Buckley Amendment. By signing this page, you're agreeing that when it's necessary, you will let your personal information and education records be released to your school or the NCAA. Part 3 of the Summary of Regulations is a release that allows the NCAA to use your name or picture to promote NCAA championships or other events. There are 3 sections in Part 4. You'll be signing only 2 of the 3 sections, so please pay careful attention. You will not sign both Part A and Part B. You will sign only one of these 2 options. Go slowly through this section to make sure you're signing the correct part. You will sign Section A if you have never tested positive for banned substances in a test administered by the NCAA or other athletics organization like the NAIA or USOC. Please note, this section is not asking about drug tests you may have taken as part of a job. This section also does not apply to institutional drug testing results. That means if you were tested as part of your school's own drug testing program and tested positive, you can still sign A. This section only relates to NCAA drug tests. If you're tested by the NCAA, by an international athletics organization, or by a non-NCAA athletics organization and you tested positive, you must sign Part B. Finally, everyone will sign Part C. This section explains that if you test positive for a banned substance in a test administered by the NCAA or other athletics organization, you're required to report that test results to your athletics director. Your athletics director will then report the information to the NCAA. This concludes your guided tour of the Summary of Regulations and Student-Athlete Statement. Please review the information in the forms carefully, complete, and sign your Student-Athlete Statement. Good luck with school and have a great season.